Thumbs up. Doors are going shut. That means we're started. Okay. Hey, glad that you are here tonight. Those of you joining us online, glad that you're here as well. And I say that, and I really mean it, because I need some help tonight, okay? It'll become clear as we get going tonight why I need help, but I'm counting on you all to answer some questions for me. And to start with, to get us kind of thinking in that direction, I Googled 10 facts that every American should know. So I want to see if we know what every American should know. What are the first 10 amendments to the Constitution called? Bill of Rights. We've got school teachers and everything in here. Very good. Which state has what U.S. state has the most land area? Alaska. There you go. First man to walk on the moon? Neil Armstrong. That's how I talk to our kids. Second man? Buzz Aldrin. Very good. Buzz Aldrin. Most Americans don't know that. What are the three branches of the U.S. government? Very good. Nice. So, what were we, like 4 for 4? This is a tough one. Every American should know this. What is the longest river in the United States? Every American, I Googled this. No, the Missouri River.
There's a difference between should know and
That's right. Big difference between should and does. It's 2,300 miles. Who knew? The Missouri River is 2,300 miles long. Missouri. Which U.S. president served the longest time in office? FDR. Yep. Who was the principal author of the Declaration of Independence? Thomas Jefferson. Who did America fight in the War of 1812? British, yeah, United Kingdom. How many justices serve on the U.S. Supreme Court? 9. Whoever said 9 is right. Nicely done. What was the purpose of the Monroe Doctrine? I'm actually going to be a little bit surprised if you know this. It's what? No, that's the Louisiana Purchase. There you go. There you go. Every American and Ron knows that. Any attempt by European powers to interfere would be considered a threat. So, here's what else I did. That was just to get us thinking. That was just to get us to 703. I also Googled. This isn't from me. This is from the internet, so you know it's true. I Googled the top 10 Bible stories that everybody knows. You got 3 strikes. So let's just see if we can get the top 10. David and Goliath. Yep, number 6. Noah and the ark. Number 3. Adam and Eve, somebody said. Yep. Number 2. Jonah and the whale. We're on a roll. Number 4. Days of creation, which is different than Adam and Eve. So yes, good. Let's just stop at Jesus. Okay, birth of Jesus. There you go. That's one. And another with Jesus is the death of Jesus. Christmas and Easter, I guess everybody knows. Moses, yeah. Moses in the 10 Commandments, but we're going with that. We're like doing great. How many we've got left? We only one that you didn't get yet. I'm going to give you a hint because it's a weird one. It's not weird at all, but it's a little bit different lane. You're right, that is on here. There was 2. That was number 7. There was 2 we didn't get. Very good. Number 10 is Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. No, but it should be.
Did we tell you the flood already?
Yeah, somebody said Noah's Ark. Yep. I'll give you a hint because you won't come up with it. I wouldn't have. It's a parable. Prodigal son. Yep. The top 10 things. Oh, I take it back. I said prodigal sons. Good Samaritan is a Good Samaritan. There's the list. I think we did pretty awesome. I think I'm teaching a class full of Bible experts. And we have spent the last couple weeks talking about number 6, David and Goliath. A story that we all know so well. And you would think 2 weeks is enough to get through David and Goliath. It's not. Because I've got some questions, okay? And you're going to help me answer the questions tonight. 1 Samuel 17:16 says that for 40 days the Philistines came forward every morning and evening, the Philistine, and took his stand. Goliath stood and taunted morning and night, twice a day apparently, for 40 days. Since we're on such a roll, what are some other examples of the number 40 in Scripture? Tyler. Just shout it out.
Okay, I was going to say it on mine so the stream could hear, but
I'll repeat it. It'll be short.
40 years in the wilderness.
40 years in the wilderness. Very good.
It rained 40 days.
Rain for 40 days and 40 nights. Very good. Jesus was tempted 40 days. Fasted for 40 days as well. Yep. Moses fasted for 40. Nicely done. Yes, he did. Very good. Yeah. I'll help you here. 40 days and 40 nights in the flood. Moses spent 40 years. Actually, Moses spent 40, 40, and 40. His life can be divided into 3 40s. He's on Mount Sinai, 40 days and 40 nights. The law specified 40 lashes if someone was to be whipped. The Israelites, spies, took 40 days to spy out Canaan. The Israelites wandered 40 years in the wilderness. Israel served the Philistines for 40 years. Goliath taunted the army of Saul for 40 days. When Elijah fled from Jezebel, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights to Mount Horeb. Nineveh was given 40 days to repent. And Jesus was tempted 40 days and 40 nights. There's a lot of religious authors who claim 40 days, 40 nights, 40 years. That is not a specific amount of time. That is just the Bible's way of saying a good deal of time. All those 40 days, 40 nights. Really means like a pretty good deal of time. Personally, I don't believe that. I think when it says 40 days, it's 40 days. I think when it says 40 years, it's 40 years. Is there, yeah, go ahead, Chris.
I'm glad you said that because there's a lot of Bible scholars that, they feel like they have to not, agree with what it actually says.
Yeah.
It's like their academic, credentials. They have to somehow question it to make them smarter than everybody else.
That's what it says, but that's not what it means.
Yeah, it's like, oh, I'm so smart, I know what it really means.
Yeah.
If you see on the internet, there's all these feeds, that come up on YouTube all the time. What does the scripture really mean that Jesus said? It's like he said what he said.
Yep.
You here 2,000 years later, here you are coming up with this new information like you think you're so smart.
What do you think is significance of 40 days in Scripture? Because it does show up a lot. 7 shows up a lot, 3 shows up a lot, but 40 shows up a lot. Is there any significance to kind of a set time? And I'm thinking specifically in this story of David and Goliath. Is there any significance to the fact? What's up? Oh, I thought something was going on out there. Okay. Any significance to the fact that 40 days go by that Goliath is out taunting people before David shows up? And after Chris just said, these smart people, they think, here's what it really means. I've never been accused of being a smart person. And what I'm about to say might not be what it really means, but I've got some thoughts. But do you think there's any significance to 40 days go by before something happens? And it happens over and over again, 40 days, 40 days. What's that?
I told
Yes, you did. He warned me. Renee.
Sometimes if you use something, oh, I'm sorry. Sometimes if you use something repetitively, I believe it was 40 days, but when it's repetitive, it makes you think, okay, it was a long time again. It's a long time one more time. When I write long law review articles, I'll have one hook, and I'll use it throughout the whole 70, 80-page paper.
Yeah.
Because it keeps the reader engaged.
Okay. Yeah. It does represent, okay, there's some time goes by here. It wasn't yesterday, it wasn't 2 days from now. It's 40 days go by. I don't know. Here's my thought. 40 days, 40 years certainly does represent, a while. I think it's an example of God giving people time to decide, time to repent, time to change, time to make a decision, time to do something. Manny, right there, Matt.
I remember researching something like this before, the number 40 itself, and it had to do with trials, testing, and probation.
I'll take your word for that. There you go. It's all on the internet, right? Word from the foyer. Okay, word from the foyer. Very nice. I read this, and this got me thinking about it in the story of David and Goliath. I think 40 days might have something to do with just a reminder that God's in charge. That I don't think it was a coincidence that David showed up on the 40th day. I think God said, I think God's thinking, I want David to pick this fight. And he's going to pick it on the 40th day. Because there's something special about the 40th day for God. And I'm not sure what it is. But here's another thing that happens 40 days later. To me, it's just one more, if it's not a proof, it at least got me thinking, okay, God had a plan for this whole thing. What do you think, Dave?
Yeah, I like that. I think the other thing is 40 days doesn't tie into anything related to the sun or the moon or any kind of astral thing that false gods or folks might be waiting on. So it's clearly independent of that, which I think supports, what you're saying, that God's given a period of time. It's Him given a period of time. It's not being controlled by nature or by anything else.
Angie had her hand up. Oh, here. Oh, I'm sorry. Whatever.
I was just thinking of going back to high school, having to remember so many dates and so many times, and this is God's way of making it easy on us. Okay, this is 40. Everything's, not everything, but 40 so many times. So we don't have to remember so many various times. We're simple-minded.
What do you think, Angie?
I was thinking that even the number 40 is easy to remember, but I think that the amount of 40 is a lot. And it's enough time to make it like it can't be a coincidence that he showed up or a coincidence that it stopped raining, or we can't explain it away because it's almost become a habit of, okay, this is happening. It was like when COVID came and we thought it was going to be over in a week, and then it was like, oh no, this has been over a month. Yeah. And then it's been a couple, it was just a change and a shift, and I think it's just long enough, whether it's like days or years, good grief. But it can feel like a lifetime in a way. Things can change, and so I think that he takes enough time so that it's okay, you've had it all this time. Now I'm gonna move, or I'm gonna make a move, and it's particular.
I think maybe it's possible that that maybe God's much more involved in our lives than we think He is. I know that's a fact, but one more argument that God's very involved in our life. What do you think, Okira?
Yes, the concept of time. We look at 40 days of fasting. When you deprive the body just after 3 days, your mental and your body really starts to deteriorate and break down. And you endure that for 4 days, 5 days. It just takes a tremendous, it's almost torture And this is why in many prisons they don't feed people for a period of time, because it's an aspect of torture. And when you look at the discipline it takes to stay true, the type of spirituality a person would have to have with not eating for that many days, 40 years, that's a generation. Yeah. So you got a generation where they wandered in the wilderness, and the intent is that I'm going to walk you until you die, because those of you who did this, you're not going to enter in. None of you are. Hence, you only had a few of those men to actually enter into the promised land. Yeah. 40 days of taunting, shaming, and antagonizing. You do that enough, that person or that group of people will feel that there's nothing I can do. It's like telling a lie. You keep telling a lie every day, day after day after day, and you don't challenge it. It begins to settle in that becomes the truth. So, like you said, the test for God, or God testing, man. What was Israel's response in the middle of Goliath taunting them? They all were afraid, and every day he came out there, they just became more and more afraid.
Yeah. Put a pin in that, by the way. Good thoughts. I told you I have some questions, and since we're all Bible experts, we've already proven that we know everything about the famous stories. I'm hoping that you will help me answer some of these questions. The first one we have dealt with at length. I wanted to put it up just because it's one of my big questions. Why did they allow Goliath to set the rules? We've talked about that. We're not going to deal with that again. We don't want to revisit that, but I did want to include it in my question. And we brushed up against this next one as well. Why didn't Saul fight Goliath? And should Saul have fought Goliath? We talked about the idea that Saul is the king. He is their giant. He's their head and shoulders above everybody else. If it's a one-on-one battle, shouldn't it make sense that the king, Saul, is fighting the one-on-one? The outcome of the Israelite nation kind of hangs in the balance. Let's put our best guy there. It should be Saul. By the way, later on, and I'm sure we're going to talk about it because it's one of my favorite stories, me and Mike, by the way, David fights a giant later on, much later, another giant named Ishbi-Benob, who by all accounts is a son of Goliath, and he can't beat him. Abishai comes up and kind of saves the day. And Abishai tells David, you can't be fighting giants anymore. You're the lamp of Israel. And David basically tells Abishai, that's what I do. I fight giants. Kings fight giants. Leaders fight giants. In fact, we're going to find out that David is involved with killing at least 4 other giants. Chris?
I don't think that's wise. And the Bible,
don't think it's wise.
It's not wise for the king. If he's not a giant himself and really seriously able to do this thing, there are alternatives, lots and lots of alternatives for a wise man to do when there's a crazy giant standing in front of him. You don't have to go head to head with the giant. It's like me fighting Shaquille O'Neal would be a really stupid thing. But maybe I can be smarter instead of fight harder. And I think there were a lot of options on the table that Saul just was scared. He didn't make good decisions, and he had an army at his disposal. When this guy steps out on the field and starts talking trash, he could have come up with strategies. He could have set 100 archers loose on him. I mean, there are things they could do rather than sit there and take this abuse for 40 days. And, if he would have been listening to the Spirit of God, I'm sure there would have been a lot of answers.
So
but
Saul,
for him to physically,
so you think Saul should not have fought Goliath?
I don't think so. For him to physically want to fight a giant.
Was David king? Had David been anointed king at that point?
Yeah. Yeah.
Did David choose to fight the giant?
Yeah.
Was he outmanned at every turn? It looked like a complete mismatch?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Tony, over here, then Dave.
I think it's interesting in relation to the 40 days. I think over those 40 days where Goliath was taunting the Israelites, Saul was terrified. And it gave him that reaction over the 40 days of oh man, I can't do this. This guy is a giant. He's saying all these things. I'm overwhelmed. But on the flip side, David had the exact opposite reaction. Over the 40 days, he built up the courage, and he was angered by it. He was angered on behalf of the Lord by it. And I think that's interesting how over 40 days, one person could have this reaction. Over 40 days, somebody else could have the exact opposite reaction.
Very good. Mike and then Dave. We'll go kind of keep Matt from running too hard.
I think we mentioned last week, Saul was kind of on a downhill slide as far as his effectiveness. We said he was bothered by demons. There was things going on, but I think Saul saw it as I can't do this, and we can't. Now I'm not sure I don't remember if it says how big the army behind Goliath was, but David never saw it as Saul's not fighting me. Saul's fighting God.
You bring up a good point. The Spirit had left Saul.
Yeah.
Maybe he shouldn't have been the one fighting.
Well,
without the Spirit
definitely
of
like
God.
that.
And did Saul know that the Spirit of God had left him?
Yeah. Well,
Do
and
we
no
ever
one
know
knew
if the Spirit
David,
of God leaves us?
and no one else knew David was the anointed one. It appears
True.
anyway.
Very good.
But David saw this as they were fighting. These guys were attacking God.
Right. Yeah.
No one can defeat God. Saul saw they're attacking me, and there's a lot of them, and one big one, and
Yeah.
So he hesitated. Like I say, if you hesitate, suddenly the inaction just becomes as painful as losing a battle, I think.
Dave.
So just before this happened, Samuel told Saul in chapter 16, "The Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you today and has given it to your neighbor who is better than you." Now, I don't know if he was referring to David or if he was referring to the Philistines, but Saul has no reason to think that he can go to the Lord and get the kind of help that David can. And anyone who steps forward to challenge Goliath's rules, it's, well, you're a chicken, come on. It's going to be hard for them to do that.
Okay. Good point. Doing a good job, Matt.
Saul fought for his own glory. David fought for the glory of God. So
Shouldn't have Saul said, I'll do it. I'll do it. Man, I'm going to be the big dog with hot sauce if I can kill him.
but he wasn't going to be the big dog because he knew he had limited power. He didn't believe in God's power the way David did.
Very good. What you think, James?
This is the second time that Saul had really felt the fear. Instead of stepping up, he actually whimpered up.
Yeah.
Instead of saying, I actually own up to what I got to do, he didn't. He actually buckled up.
In fact, I'll agree with Tony that it was the 40th time that Saul said, I'm not going to do this.
I was thinking that Saul lost sight of who was the actual power, that all the Israelites and his people, he was the one that was guiding them, and he was the one that was winning battles, and Saul just lost sight of that, and so...
Remember Goliath said, aren't you the army of Saul? Not the army of God. And I think Saul bought into that. Akira.
Yeah, in that text, and that during this time and even long after this time, it was common in war for a war to be sided based upon the most valiant warrior of one side or the other side. And it would be like, if you defeat us, we surrender. If you beat our guy, we'll surrender. And vice versa. If we beat you, we take what you have. And he had said that. Goliath had told them that. If you kill me, we'll be your slaves. If not, vice versa. So again, when you look at why the army wasn't fighting, and I agree, the king normally has an elite fighting guard who are warriors, and they've always had mighty men of valor. who could fight. But in this case, none of them had the courage to step up for this one-on-one challenge, which this was to the entire army.
Yeah.
And again, David comes along, and in the middle of this challenge, he steps up to it. Again, what everyone is saying about David, because this is God's anointing. He's not the king yet, but he's like a regular body in that nation who's saying, I'll step up for the challenge. But it was common during that time for the best warrior of each force to stand forth in battle. And it didn't help that Goliath was as huge as he was.
Yeah, we read this, we think this is nuts. Why would they do this one-on-one? Actually, this was in history, there's a lot of representative battles where it's man against man. So it wasn't that unusual, really. The better question to me is, why didn't Jonathan fight him? Jonathan was there. And all the reasons that we can use for why Saul didn't, you can't use those for Jonathan. Jonathan is a man of valor. He is a warrior. He has incredible faith in God. Jonathan trusts in the Lord. Remember, it's 3 chapters earlier where Jonathan and his armor bearer at Michmash say, if these guys taunt us, we're going up there and we're killing them. They get taunted and they climb up the hill and kill 20 of them. Him and his armor bearer killed 20 Philistines. Personally, even if it's 10 and 10, I'd rather fight one big guy than 10 regular guys. So why didn't Jonathan fight him? What do you think, Tyler?
We don't know if Jonathan was even there. Saul might not have let him go to the battle, for all we know.
You're right. We're not told that Jonathan was there. I'm assuming that Jonathan is there. Could have been there in 40 days.
I was just thinking it might be possible. Now, this is just a guess of a possibility. With nothing to back this up, but just thought could be. After the last battle Jonathan was in, where he sort of did his own thing, and all the stuff that followed, it might have hurt Saul's ego a bit, and he didn't want to let Jonathan go to the next fight.
You might be right. I said it was 3 chapters ago. It was 17 years. Michmash was 17 years before this. So some time has gone by for sure, and you might be right.
Yeah, just a thought. I could be wrong.
I would assume that the son of the king, who everyone assumes is going to be the next king, would have been there for this major battle.
Yeah, it just, you got to remember we're talking about Saul.
Nicole, over here.
Since he was the son of the king, he could have been the unnamed designated survivor.
Yeah, which would make sense, right? And I'm kind of laughing, but you're exactly right. And that's also an argument for Saul. Well, I'm the king. If something happens to me, I gotta protect myself. I think personally, and I'm assuming that Jonathan was there. I think, again, it goes back to what Tony said over here. I think after 40 days, I think inactivity breeds inactivity. I think fear breeds fear. I think doubt breeds doubt. I think if we sit around over day after day after day and we're not going to act the first day, we're not going to act the second day, I think by the time 40 days goes by, it's really easy to say, not today either. Get intimidated. We forget what God's done in our lives. We forget where our strength comes from. We look at, the enemy, and after 40 days, he's still as big as ever. In fact, I think he's bigger, too big, too strong. I'm not fighting him. That old saying, sometimes the Lord calms the storm, sometimes he lets the storm rage and calms his child. I don't think the Israelites were very calm after 40 days. I got lots more questions, by the way. We are never going to get through my questions tonight, but that's okay. I'm learning things. Next question. Why would you allow the fate of all of Israel to be determined by a kid? Why would Saul do that? Well, it's David. It's David, the man after God's own heart. It's David, we know what he becomes. Saul didn't know any of that. Saul says, you're a kid, you're a shepherd. Why would Saul allow the fate of all of Israel? It's all hanging in the balance. Why would he take this huge responsibility, place it on the very slender shoulders of this shepherd to represent all of Israel? And why would the entire army go along with it? We got to be slaves to them unless this kid beats that giant. Mike.
You know, we've said all this stuff about maybe Saul didn't even recognize David, even though he played. Maybe Saul did know who David was.
Okay.
And maybe Saul's like, what's the worst could happen? We all die, or this kid does something, and maybe he dies, but Saul's appeased.
There you go.
And, you know, I mean, Saul was pretty corrupt by this time. And
This might be kind of a, not a win-win, but at least not a lose-lose for Saul.
there's no record of anybody saying this guy's just a kid. So for some reason, maybe I think when David came up and talked about God and the power of God, can you imagine? It's not like TV where these people are on a loudspeaker system and saying these things in this huge army of thousands of people. It was all getting transferred. He said, God's with us. He said maybe everyone was reminded of what they had forgotten.
Okay.
And it really kind of fired them up, I think.
Okay.
You know, I mean, you're going from hopeless to, wait a minute, there is hope. There's a lot of hope. We've got a God who's done this. You know, I think, you know, I think they were just so, they were apathetic for so long. Well, somebody wants to do it, let them do it. They really just kind of.
And maybe no one else was going to do it. Maybe that's why he did it. We'll get back to you, Tyler.
Well, in verse 33, Saul is kind of questioning him. He's like,
Yeah.
you can't do this. And David kind of gives him his resume. He said, well, I've taken lambs out of the mouth of a bear, and I've fought bears. And so he's kind of giving him his resume. And once Saul says, okay, I mean, who's the army? They can't really go against what Saul has said. So, you know, he's
And
the
maybe
king.
David's argument was so compelling and so passionate. And yeah, maybe that's why. What do you think, Tyler?
I'd say evidently there are a lot of reasons to go with David, since, you know, everyone's saying different things that are all true and, you know, all valid and stuff. So, you know, there's a lot of different things. I'd also like to add the fact that, well, no one else was willing to do it. He's the only one who was.
Yep.
So it's either him or nobody.
Or 40 more
So
days.
they didn't exactly have a choice anyway, but, you know, all the other stuff makes him even more qualified. So,
Okay.
you know, being like, oh, this guy's really inspiring, and he's killed bears and lions. That's not bad.
Yeah, I think that, I'm sorry, go ahead, Okira.
I think it's just another pattern of God using the weakest, the smallest, the most insignificant to show Israel who my power is. And I mean, that's what he's always done. Use the smallest, the least, what seemed impossible to show what's possible with me in delivering my people.
Yeah, you know, we see it from in hindsight, and you know, we can look back and say that's why David got to do it. You know, but Saul didn't know that. The Israelites didn't know that, and I think there might be something to the idea of, you know, Saul's like, you know, if this kid goes out and wins, great, fantastic. If he goes out and loses, it's not on me. I didn't lose. You know, David lost for us. It's David's fault. You know. Or it was God's fault. Let me take just a minute or two and vent a little bit. I wonder sometimes, you know, what it is that that upsets God. What is it that makes God just kind of shake his head, go, boy, that's upsetting. And this is coming from me, not from anybody else. I think one of the things that upsets God is when people stand back and criticize and complain about people who are trying to grow the kingdom, people who are trying their best to conscientiously and humbly, introduce people to Jesus. It has gotten very popular, and I read more of this stuff than I probably should, but I read a lot of stuff. It's just gotten really popular to rag on the church and rag on the kingdom and complain about either the church universally or the church, specifically, locally. And I am so tired of reading blogs and hearing podcasts and reading, all this books about here's what's wrong with the church, here's what's wrong with Christians. And I think, I got to think it bothers God. In fact, I think putting down the church is a very dangerous thing. There are times when, we need to be honest and we need to right some wrongs, but I think just to be in the habit of, I'm going to put down the Lord's church, I think that is a dangerous thing. I think it's sin. And personally, I think if you're out fighting a lion or a bear or a giant, you don't have time to argue about what's going on back at camp, okay? There, that's my Wednesday night soapbox. Sorry. Go ahead, Chris.
This whole story and the discussion we're having kind of reminds me of what we were talking about in Hebrews chapter 11 last Sunday. Is all of these
David's in there, by the way.
All of these halls of faithful, and one of them was mentioned, I think, stopped the mouths of lions and fought giants. I think this was included in that list. But the reason the list was there was to remind us of the faithful of old and to encourage faithful now. Because we live in the time when we know all these stories. We should have a bank of faith in us that comes from all of the history of what God's done. And in the New Testament, He's got angels running around breaking people out of prison.
There you go.
And so why should we feel like we should be defeated and we should be afraid when David wasn't afraid and he didn't have the Holy Spirit in him and he didn't have the promises of the Messiah? We live in the time where all of those promises and prophecies are fulfilled, and our King reigns now from heaven. Why are we so timid and afraid with everything that we see? You're talking about these blogs and people talking down the church. I think too many times we don't understand that we live in a time when we should be most faithful and most bold, but many of us
We've been given
aren't.
all things that pertain to life and godliness.
Yeah, we've got the end of thousands of years of history of God dealing with amazing situations, and yet many times we have way less faith than David did fighting a lion.
Yeah. I did want to go back, and I think it was Ben that mentioned it, why allow David. I think there is probably something to the fact that David had a very compelling pitch to Saul. Killing the lion, killing the bear, taking his job so seriously. The fact that David trained in total obscurity and total anonymity. And I think there's some practical lessons there, some obvious lessons, that it was those instances when nobody was watching, nobody knew, that David was preparing to fight the giant. And God was preparing David to fight the giant. Sometimes when we're doing what we should be doing in total obscurity, God is preparing us for something that's going to be done out of the shadows. Abraham Lincoln had a quote that went something along the lines of, great opportunities are given to people who take the most of small opportunities. And I think this story kind of bears that out. Okay, got another question for you. This is a good one, because I don't have the answer to this one. Why not expect God to use a sword or spear in the hands of David? David gets the nod to fight Goliath. Saul pulls him aside, says, you're going to need this. He gives him, his armor. David puts it on. He gives him his sword. He attaches it to himself. David says, I'm not used to this. Why didn't God just make David use the sword in such an unbelievable way that David admits this battle's God's. It's all going to be God anyway. It's not going to be me. God's just using me. It's going to be God's battle. Why not expect Saul's sword to kill the giant? Because let's face it, that's how it was done. You know, swords, spears, arrows, that's what killed people. That's how it's always been done. Why did David say, it's true, I don't know how to use these things, but it doesn't matter because it's going to be the hand of God, not mine. What do you think, Dave?
Well, God takes off the table any shred of Saul being able to take credit.
Ooh, okay. Angie, not Angie. Angie's mother, Jeannie.
Yeah. The stone hit him and knocked him out. Was he dead at that point, or when he cut his head off with sword?
The NIV says he killed him with the stone and then cut his head off. There's some argument about that. Does it? Okay. I think the stone killed him, but there's some argument about that. Yeah. I got another question about that, by the way, but go ahead, Tyler.
Oh, there are a lot of reasons that I can think of, which might alone be reason enough, of having a lot of reasons, but I was just going to say, using just, what the sword and spear is, what you would expect to kill a big guy like that, or just in general, it would be very predictable, and evidently God doesn't always like doing things a predictable way. He likes to surprise people to make it more obvious and evident, hey, it's me.
I got that. I agree with that.
Yeah, again, there are also other reasons you could say, like, that's what David was good with.
Ooh,
another reason,
Okay.
Just a lot of things, which, I would say a lot of things that God does have a lot of different reasons rather than just one thing.
I'm smiling because your mother's down here. Tyler's mother has the next comment.
Along with what Tyler was saying, God has this way of taking away our armor. I was just thinking of the story of Gideon, where he dwindles down the army so it's so small that there is absolutely no way man could claim victory over the victory. Okay. And he's doing the same thing. He took this big army and whittled it down to this young boy and a little stone and a sling to win the victory over the Philistines.
Like it, yeah. Over here, Tony.
It reminded me of a quote from Tim Keller. He said, when God does his work, he deliberately does it in reversal of the world's values. And so I think of like a sword or a spear of something powerful. And God is like, no, I don't need that. I'm going to do it my way and show my power, not man's power. So it's kind of along the same lines.
Good thoughts. I'll share with you a couple of my thoughts. I think this is David, to a certain extent, saying, just let me do the best with what I'm best at. Just let me do what I do best. I've never used a sword. I'm not good at throwing a spear. I'm pretty good with a slingshot. Let me use my slingshot. Let God empower me. Let God amplify my talent. His strategy, I'm sure, didn't make a lot of sense to soldiers around him. There was one way to kill a giant, right? It was with a spear, a sword, or a javelin. That's how you killed giants. That's how Saul had done it. That's how Joshua did it. It's going to be how David does it later on, by the way. David's going to use sword and spear later on. But David says, this is what I'm best at. Just let me use what I'm best at. And I always kind of cringe a little bit when I hear people say, if you want to be successful in ministry, you've got to do it this way. If you want to be successful as a local congregation, you've got to do it this way. You've got to read this book. You've got to implement this program, the latest and the greatest. But I can't do what you can do. And you can't do what she can do. Corinthians, Romans tells us exactly that. We've all been given different talents. We've all been given different abilities. and it's not just some cookie cutter thing. Here's, you know, the goal is the same, but I think this shows God's going to use our talents. What are you good at? What are you really good at? Well, I'm pretty good with a slingshot. Well, I'm pretty good at cooking. I'm pretty good at mowing grass. I'm pretty good at sitting down and talking the Bible with people. I'm pretty good at that. I'm pretty good at making friends. All the things that God amplifies our strengths at. I think there's a lesson there. Maybe I'm reaching a little bit, but you know, let me use the talents that God gave me. I'll take my sling. I'll take my stone. And as crazy as it sounds, I'll go fight a giant. Yeah. Somebody had a hand up? Maybe not. Okay.
I gave it back.
Okay, very good. Okay.
You're on a roll. I didn't want to mess with you.
Well, good. We made it through half my questions. We're going to take another week to talk about, because I got more questions, and Dave's pretty good about giving us homework when he teaches. I'll give you some homework. Read that story again, and see if you don't have some questions, because I got a lot more questions about this story that I heard since I was 5 years old. You know, had it memorized since I was 5 years old. Every year in VBS, I know the story. Don't talk to me about. I don't want to read it out anymore. Don't need to. Read it again. You'll come up with some questions, and. It seems like every week I'm saying, well, we didn't get quite far enough this week, but that's okay. I learned some things tonight, and I hope you did too. Any final thought? I don't want to cut anybody off, but we're about out of time. Good. Thanks for your input. Thanks for your help. Let's close with a prayer. Father, thank you for being so good to us, and thank you for being so good for so long. And we thank you for your goodness, and we thank you for your grace. And Father, as we leave this place, I pray that you would go with us. I pray that you would be as involved in our lives, that we would know that you're involved in our lives as you are, and that you would open our eyes to what's going on around us and how you're involved and how you're moving things around. Father, help us do the best we can with what we have. Help us to use the talents that you gave us for your glory. Be with us. Help us to be more like Jesus. It's in his name that I pray. Amen.